Good morning, Rockingham and Bellows Falls, and welcome to the feed. It's Mike and Marty. Here we are, May 10th. Spring has sprung. It's beautiful. Oh, it's amazing. Today we're going to be joined by Dr. Alexis Chesney. She's joining us from Georgia. We're going to be talking about, this is another one of those Sojourn's highlight days we've been doing.
Mm-hmm. And Provider Spotlight.
Sojourn Spotlight. And she's going to be talking about ticks and tick-borne illnesses and what we can do to understand what we need to do about that. But first, Marty, with the local events.
Yeah, so I apologize, I have a very abbreviated version today, and I don't have slides. It was just one of those mornings.
Yes.
At the Bells Falls Opera House, it is the second week of Guardians of the Galaxy 3. That will be playing until May 23rd. And the classic movie tonight is The Goonies. That is sponsored by New Hampshire Mechanical Motion Parts and Assemblies. And I believe they're a new sponsor to the classic movie sponsorship. So congratulations, and thank you for being willing to sponsor a classic movie.
Great.
So not only did all the plants and the flowers kind of pop this weekend with the sun, but so did the ticks.
Oh, yeah.
So this is very timely.
It's a really good time for Alexis to join us. So welcome, Alexis, and let's see. Alexis.
Hi, thank you so much
Hi.
for having me.
Great. Why don't you tell us a little bit about you and your practice and how you work with sojourns?
Absolutely. Well, first, happy Lyme Disease Awareness Month. That's May. So as you said, as spring has sprung, so have the ticks. So it's very timely. Yes, I'm a naturopathic doctor at Sojourn's Community Health Clinic. And I lived and worked up in Vermont for 13 years and just recently moved to Savannah, Georgia. So I'm joining you from down here where it's a little warmer. And we have ticks probably more year-round than up there. So, but we're going to be focusing on Vermont and New England today. And I'm really excited to be able to educate you about ticks and tick bite prevention.
Okay. So tell us a little bit about, because there are various kinds of ticks, right? And some are more benign than others. And what should we be looking for, I guess?
Yeah, in your area, the black-legged tick is the big culprit. It can carry Lyme disease as well as other diseases. There are also American dog ticks, which in that area do not carry disease at this point, which is really a relief. And then Lone Star ticks are making their way up to New England. So I have not had any patients report having a Lone Star tick bite yet, but we think it's a matter of time, and they carry other diseases. So yeah, I'd love to run through some slides so that we can see the differences.
So
okay, shall I do that now?
Yeah, that'd be great. Thanks.
Yeah.
Great. So yeah, I'm really passionate about helping people understand the differences between these ticks and the way that they look, so that if you get a tick bite, you know whether or not it's one of the ticks that carry diseases. So here we have our deer tick, otherwise known as the black-legged tick, or Ixodes scapularis. And Borrelia burgdorferi is the pathogen, the bacterium, that causes Lyme disease. So this is one of the pathogens that it carries that we all hear about mostly, right? But also it can carry other pathogens. So actually Vermont was #1 for anaplasmosis cases in the country. So it's really high risk to be bitten by black-legged ticks in the area because they can carry Lyme as well as anaplasma, as well as some of these other pathogens. So I think that's important to know that Babesia and Powassan virus can also be carried by black-legged ticks. So you'll see this nice reddish tan back, that's its abdomen. So if we look at tick identification, we actually don't look at that area, although that's what people often notice. And when it's an adult tick, you will notice that tan reddish abdomen. So that's easy. However, when you have a nymph, which is the second stage, it's like the teenager tick, you're not going to have that tan red. It's going to be black. So it's going to be fully black.
Okay.
So the better part to identify would be that dorsal shield, which is that black part. And now we're going to compare this, and then I'll come back to that in anatomy a little bit. But let's talk about the American dog tick. So you can already see how different it looks, at least when you can really look at it, right? Because they're so small, so they're hard to find and really examine. But this American dog tick in other areas, not in Vermont, but they can carry rickettsia, which causes Rocky Mountain spotted fever, which actually we have down here in Georgia. So I'm learning a lot. But also it can carry in certain areas Francisella, which causes tularemia. But up there, for now, ticks don't carry these diseases, and so this one will kind of give you a free pass. So noticing what it looks like, that mottled, grayish, whitish dorsal shield is the way to identify that tick. So here we go into the anatomy and the differences, seeing them side by side. So if you notice that dorsal shield with the deer tick, it's that black, solid black, and then with the dog tick, it is that different sort of mottled whitish back, the dorsal shield. So we really want to differentiate those. That can help us because you can actually send off the tick to get tested to find out if it is carrying any pathogens. And if it is a black-legged deer tick, that's a good idea. And then you'll find out if it was carrying any pathogens and whether you're at risk for that transmission. Now, just to also mention, because we've got to keep our eye out for this one, Lone Star ticks, which we do have down here in Georgia also, but they're making their way up, as it sounds. They're originally found in Texas, and they've made their way up the northeastern corridor into Connecticut and New York, and now we're seeing more in Massachusetts and even Vermont and New Hampshire. So keep an eye out for these. They have that dot on their back, which is their dorsal shield. So that would be a way to identify them. And as you can see, it's a whole list of other pathogens that we have to be concerned about. Ehrlichia, which causes ehrlichiosis. And also this alpha-gal syndrome is actually a meat allergy that is not a pathogen, but it's a syndrome that can be created by a reaction that happens from proteins that are transmitted by the tick saliva. So it's a whole different ball of wax with the Lone Star tick. So just a little warning on that one. Hopefully we don't have to deal with that too much for a while. But yeah, so I have some other slides. I know we're limited time, but this is the tick life cycle, and then I'll probably just fast forward through a few so we can take a look at some Lyme rashes. But this tick life cycle just gives us an idea of when we see which ticks. So this is about the deer tick, the black-legged tick. It's a 2-year life cycle, and so we see larvae come out in the summer. And larvae are the size of a period at the end of a sentence. So they're going to attach to somebody pretty small because they don't have much energy to walk up a piece of grass. So they're going to attach to somebody low to the ground. They're probably in leaf litter. Ticks love to be in moisture and dark, moist places. So that's where they thrive. And so that's who they will probably bite. And that's usually when they get infections. So that's when they get Lyme disease. And then they could transmit it to somebody else once they become nymphs. So that's in the fall. And then we have that nymph size that's the size of a poppy seed, still very small. And they will be out also then the next year in the summertime. So for right now, we're thinking about adult ticks, which are the third stage of life, and the ones that I showed you with that nice reddish tan abdomen. So we're seeing those, they're sort of the bookends for March, April, May, and then they come back October, November. But soon we'll be headed, June, July, we'll be headed into the nymph season. So we definitely want to keep an eye out for those smaller nymphs, which are the size of a poppy seed. And that's where all of our really important preventative measures come in. So I'm just going to skip ahead. Oh, here we can see just how small they are, which you've probably seen, I imagine, before.
Yeah.
And then just the comparison between the nymph and the adult. And then here's an egg mass, scary when they put out eggs for the next generation. And then a fed tick, they do get bigger, right? So if you find one that's that large, like people will find them on their dogs, that means they had a meal. Okay. But just to get through a couple of these, here's the 2012 map, and now we see just how many more cases there were in 2019. Lyme disease is spreading throughout the U.S. And then I did want to just take a moment because there's a lot that's talked about regarding the rash. Like for Lyme, symptoms that you can get after a tick bite would include fever, flu-like symptoms, chills, sweats, new joint pain, new muscle pain, new headaches. These are things to look out for. The list goes on, and you can certainly find that information. We can give you some resources. But the rash does not always happen. It only happens under 50% of the time. There's a lot of research showing this. And I think a lot of the public thinks that if you don't get a rash around the tick bite, we're all good. So really it's important to be aware of the rash and what it can look like. That's one of the issues. But also to look out for those other symptoms for up to 30 days after a tick bite, because that's going to be important to take note of and to report to your healthcare provider. So here's, say, an erythema migrans, which is what the Lyme rash is called. It happens around a tick bite. It can also, you'll see a picture that it can happen throughout the body. But this one is on somebody's back of the shoulder, so they may have missed it. If somebody was not checking themselves in the mirror or have a partner to take a look, it's important to check that tick bite for 30 days after the bite, because you may not notice it. It's usually not itchy, inflamed. It's usually flat, so you may not even notice it. But here are some other pictures, so it can look really different. It's not always a perfect bullseye. I didn't even put up the picture of the bullseye because a lot of people see that, and the point is it doesn't have to be a perfect bullseye. So these are also ways that it can show up. So the three are looking at right around a tick bite, and then the one on the bottom is a disseminated rash. So you can get multiple lesions all over your body. This would be all over and not just around the tick bite. Wow. So that's important to know about. Yeah, so, we can certainly take a break from the slides and talk a little bit more.
Yeah, you said that the ticks pick up the various pathogens from other things. Is it like animals, mice? They'll first get infected often by the white-footed mouse. And so that's actually a target of one of the preventative measures I talk about, tick tubes. But yes, so they are born without Lyme disease or anaplasmosis, and then they would get their first infection from another animal. Oh, and my other question that came up was the ticks are like the Lone Star tick and the ticks from down south are moving. Is that because of people moving, or is it because of climate, or is it because of animals moving? What's causing that?
Yeah, there's bird migration definitely plays a role. Okay. Also, as the climate changes, they are finding that they can winter over in places like Vermont and New Hampshire and Canada, because there's not as cold temperature as there was or deep snow cover as there was. So we're seeing more ticks over the winter as well, and then they survive, and then they can hatch out some eggs in the spring and such.
So I'm just trying to follow the tick life cycle. So when you have the little, and making sure that I have it correct. So when you have the little baby ones, the ones that are just the little black dots, those don't carry the disease yet? Am I understanding that? Or you still have to be cautious? Yes, and usually they're not going to bite a human because they're not going to move very far. Okay.
So it's really once they become nymphs, we see those, and those are carrying pathogens, size of a poppy seed. We're going to see those infect people. Okay. And then the adults as well will be carrying pathogens and can infect people.
Okay. So can you conceivably get a tick bite, never know you had one, and then start having symptoms?
Yes, that happens a lot too. So 50% of people with Lyme disease do not recall a tick bite. So that's an issue as well. Yeah, it can be found later on when somebody notices, why am I having these odd fevers or joint pains that move around the body and come and go? That's very classic for Lyme disease symptoms. And they might get tested later on and be found to have Lyme.
Okay. And is there, I think that are there false positives with Lyme testing, or is there a really good definitive test to say, yes, you have it?
There are more issues with false negatives.
Okay.
The typical testing done is not very accurate, actually, and I have some extra training, so I do offer some specialized testing that does bring more sensitivity and specificity, so we can do better testing and really identify if somebody is dealing with Lyme. When we're talking about acute Lyme, we're talking about prevention and ticks, so we're a little bit more talking about acute Lyme today. So, testing is not accurate, any of them. A hospital lab is not going to be accurate until after 4 weeks from a tick bite. So when somebody comes down with a fever or a swollen knee or bullseye rash or, Lyme rash, this is probably going to happen, first week, second week after a tick bite, something like that. And you can't actually get an accurate test result on that. And most people are aware of that, but there are some patients I've seen that they have told me they've been tested before the 4 weeks after a tick bite, with a fever and joint pain, but they were told, well, you don't have Lyme, which is really, really unfortunate.
Yeah.
So usually we would initiate treatment at that point because it's really a clinical diagnosis. Anaplasmosis, however, that test is accurate, and you can do that test early on within the first 2 weeks. So that's helpful. So just to review some of those symptoms, anaplasmosis, usually we're going to see a high fever, like 104, 105, also like the worst headache of your life. So a lot of these people go to the ER and they'll get the test and they'll get the treatment that they need, which is doxycycline for 2 weeks. And it's actually very well treated. It will be horrible to experience while you're experiencing it, but then it resolves, and you move on with life. Things are a little trickier in the Lyme world regarding testing, regarding proper treatment, et cetera. So yes, and now because there's so much anaplasmosis in Vermont, it's really important to know about that.
Okay.
Oh, okay. I didn't
you
know
brought up a really
that.
good point, because I have actually, it seems like the treatment has changed over the last maybe 8 or 10 years. Is that I can remember them saying, well, you needed to bring the tick in and they would try to test it. But the last time I did this, they just gave me 2 weeks of the antibiotic and then that was it, and said they weren't going to test or anything. Is that changing, or is that just is there a difference between how you approach this than how like the conventional ER doctor might approach this?
Yeah, well, there is more and more research coming out showing when we're talking about persistent Lyme or long-term Lyme or chronic Lyme, there are all these terms people use. There's more research out showing, yes, in fact, 10 to 20% of people continue to have symptoms after they are treated for Lyme disease.
Oh.
And then there's a lot of discussion about, well, why is that? And so I have been trained through an organization called ILADS, International Lyme and Associated Diseases Society. And they are a medical society that look at this other literature showing, hey, there are these different ways that Lyme can exist in the body that can make it difficult to treat. And we need to address all those ways. And actually, there are a lot of studies showing that 2 weeks or 3 weeks of certain antibiotics may not be enough for certain people to really eradicate the disease. So we need to look at longer treatments as well. So yeah, there's a little bit of a divide, unfortunately, in the medical community. And hopefully we can all get on the same page more and more. But I think that's changing, which is very hopeful.
Thank you.
My big question, what can you do to never get bitten in the first place? What are some things? What are some smart things?
These are some of my favorite conversations because we live in such a beautiful area, and you live in such a beautiful area. I loved hiking in Vermont and being outdoors, and the best part of the year is just beginning, right? So I also work with a lot of farmers and loggers and people who are outdoors a lot, even just, the love of gardening and being outside. So yes, I want people to be equipped so that you can enjoy being out there. There's a lot that you can do. So one of my favorite things is talking about the permethrin treatment of socks and shoes. Now, if you just treat your socks and shoes with permethrin, you will decrease your chances of a tick bite by 73 times.
Wow.
So there's a lot of research on permethrin. So that's an awesome one to introduce. If you're already doing tick checks, which are very important, if you're already putting your clothes into the dryer after coming in from the outdoors for 6 minutes on high, then we need to think about what else can you be doing, because we want to prevent the ticks from getting on you in the first place, right? Mm-hmm. Not just hopefully finding them crawling and taking them off, or unfortunately, if you find a tick, at least maybe you've gotten it sooner than later and pulled it off, and we can talk about what to do after a tick bite. But that permethrin is actually a chemical made originally from chrysanthemum flower, but it is toxic to our skin. So we're not spraying it on our skin like a repellent that way. You can treat materials, like I mentioned, socks and shoes, clothing, gear, like a tent or a backpack. Mm-hmm. And so if you do this treatment yourself, it lasts 6 weeks. So what I recommend, what I do is I put it on the calendar every 6 weeks. I'm treating the shoes and socks outdoors, spraying them down. So go outside, away from kids and pets, spray it down. You can use gloves. Once it's dried into the material, it is safe for us to touch and for pets and kids to be around and to wear. So then you'll have that protection, because when we think about walking outside, even in short grass, the ticks can be there. Mm-hmm. So we have that nice barrier with the shoes and the shoes and socks. So avoiding things like tall grass and walking in low shrubs, that's all very important. But you can also do this treatment, which would be very helpful.
Nice.
Sounds
so
good.
We're down to about 2 minutes. I know this has gone by fast.
Well, I know. It's really good. Thank you.
Some closing, any salient points that you want to drive home in the last 2 minutes?
Yeah, well, if you want to learn more, I have a book called Preventing Lyme and Other Tick-Borne Diseases. I worked with Story Publishing, and it was amazing to go through that process and get this information out to the public. And in that book, I talk about the ticks, the diseases, the steps to take after getting a tick bite, and prophylaxis, as well as acute treatment.
Do you have a slide of that book cover that you could share with us?
Yeah, I can share that. And they do carry it at Sojourns.
I was just going to ask, might they have that available at Sojourns?
They do. And of course, anywhere you buy books. So it could be the local bookseller in Bellows Falls, as well as anywhere you buy books, Amazon and such. So let's go back to that one. So this is the slide on the book.
Leave
and
that
also
up for a
the tick preparedness kit. And we have those at Sojourn. So that has everything you need after a tick bite. So removing the tick with an Otom tick twister, putting some andrographis on the tincture that kills Lyme, and then sending the tick off to a place called tickreport.com to see if it's carrying any pathogens. Starting some herbal prophylaxis with something called deer tick bite formula that I created based on some research that shows its efficacy against these microbes that are carried by a deer tick. And then watching for symptoms and reporting them if they came up in 30 days after the tick bite to your healthcare professional.
Great.
So yeah, if you need any help, we have a tick bite clinic at Sojourn's Community Health Clinic. So Dr. Song and myself are the Lyme literate physicians there. And so we talk to people about what to do after a tick bite or if they become symptomatic. I'm passionate about this piece of my work to get people access to talking to a professional about that.
Great. So
That's
we are
amazing.
out
Thank
of
you.
time.
And we're out of time. I want to thank Alexis
Yes.
for coming on. What a wealth of information. I'm very pleased. Thanks again. And that's it for the
Super
feed.
quickly, though, just
Oh.
one last minute thing. Sojourns is teaming up to possibly get some funding from Target. So if you are a Target Circle member, you can actually vote. You need to vote in the South Burlington area in order to be able to vote for Sojourns. But put your votes in, and Sojourns can get some funding. I just told
All right.
Sarah. I told Sarah I would.
Do
I would get that
Yay.
plug. It'd be just enough time.
Good
So
job.
thank you so much.
All right. Thank you again.
Thank you for
And we'll
having
see-
me. I hope
see
you stay
everyone next-
tick-free.
Oh, me too.
Yes. See everyone next week. Bye.
Local news, politics, business, sports, arts, music. Mike